Hello, everyone. I am the sleep storyteller, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before we begin, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps out a lot. Also, let me know in the comments, where are you from and what time are you listening? Now get comfortable and relax. The winds of the north whispered through the towering walls of Winterfell, carrying with them the stories of ages long past. Snowflakes drifted gently from the darkened sky, covering the castle's stone paths in a soft, untouched white. Within the great keep, warmth flickered from hearth fires, casting golden glows across the ancient halls. Yet beyond the comfort of flame and stone, the night carried secrets waiting to be uncovered. Bran Stark lay restless beneath thick furs, his young mind stirred by dreams that felt more like memories. Lately, his nights had been filled with visions of a lantern glowing in the darkness, its flickering light calling him forward with whispered promises of forgotten truths. Though his father, Lord Eddard Stark, often spoke of honor and duty, Bran could not shake the feeling that there was something more, something hidden deep beneath Winterfell's stones. The castle slumbered, its inhabitants safe beneath the banners of the direwolf. The great hall had grown quiet, the fires burning low, and even the ever-watchful guards were lulled into stillness by the hush of snowfall. Yet Bran, too young to ignore the pull of curiosity, slipped from his bed, wrapped himself in a heavy cloak, and tiptoed past Hodor, who snored softly against the doorframe. At his side, his direwolf, Summer, lifted his head, golden eyes gleaming in the dim light. Without a word, the beast padded silently after Bran, their steps light upon the frozen stone. Winterfell's corridors stretched before them, familiar yet eerily quiet. The torches lining the walls flickered, their shadows stretching long and thin like grasping fingers. Bran moved with careful steps, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and trepidation. He had never ventured alone to the crypts before, not at this hour. But the dream had felt so real, so urgent. He reached the entrance to the crypts, a yawning black archway descending into the cold depths beneath the castle. The air here was thick with the scent of damp stone, and something older, something untouched by time. Summer let out a low growl, his ears flattening as if sensing something Bran could not. "It's just the wind," Bran whispered, though even he was not sure he believed it. Step by step, he descended into the darkness, his breath forming soft clouds in the chill air. The flickering torch he carried did little to push back the shadows, but his feet found their way as if they had walked this path 100 times before. The crypts of Winterfell stretched endlessly before him, lined with statues of Starks long past, each carved likeness standing in solemn silence, their stone hands clutching swords against the cold. Then he saw it, beyond the statue of his great-great-grandfather, at the very edge of the dim torchlight. A glow pulsed softly, not from fire, but from something else entirely. A lantern, its light an unnatural gold, flickering as though it carried within it the very memories of the past. Bran hesitated, the weight of centuries pressing upon him. His dreams had led him here, but now that he stood before the lantern, he felt something else, something watching. Summer tensed beside him, his growl deepening into a warning. A gust of icy wind swept through the crypts, extinguishing Bran's torch in an instant, plunging them into darkness. Then from the shadows, a voice emerged. Who dares disturb the lantern of Winterfell? Bran's breath caught in his throat. The voice was deep, ancient, resonating through the stone walls, as if the very castle spoke. Summer stepped forward, his fangs bared, but Bran forced himself to stand tall, his heart hammering. "I am Bran Stark," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "This is my home." From the darkness, a figure moved. Cloaked and hooded, its robes shimmered like ice beneath the faint glow of the lantern. It did not walk, it simply was, as if the shadows themselves had shaped it. The light of the lantern flickered, casting fleeting glimpses of its face if it even had one. "A Stark," the figure mused. "The blood of wolves runs through your veins. But do you understand the weight of your name?" Bran swallowed, his fingers curling into fists. I wanted to know about the lantern. I saw it in my dreams." A low chuckle echoed through the crypts, sending shivers down Bran's spine. "This is no ordinary lantern, young wolf. It is the lantern of Winterfell, a relic from the time when the first men walked these lands. It burns not with fire, but with the light of memory." Bran's brow furrowed. The light of memory. The figure lifted a hand toward the lantern, and as if responding to an unspoken command, the glow brightened. The golden light shimmered, twisting and shifting, until shapes began to form, scenes from a time long past. Bran watched in awe as the images danced before him. Warriors clad in furs and leather, swords clashing in the midst of a frozen battlefield, direwolves howling beneath a blood-red moon, a man, a Stark of old, kneeling in the snow to swear an oath. The very history of Winterfell played out before him, a living tapestry woven into the light. "The lantern holds the stories of your ancestors," the figure said. "It is a beacon for those who seek the truth of their past. But knowledge comes with a price. Are you prepared to bear the burden of what it reveals?" Bran hesitated. He thought of his father, of the tales he had told him of honor, of duty, of the Starks who had come before. He thought of the weight of his family's legacy, the names carved in stone, the history buried beneath Winterfell. "Yes," he said finally, "I want to know." The figure nodded, lifting the lantern higher. The golden glow swelled, wrapping around Bran and Summer in a warm embrace. In an instant, the crypts melted away, replaced by the sights and sounds of a world long lost. Bran stood upon a battlefield, the roar of war surrounding him. Men fought with swords and shields, their breath steaming in the frigid air. Direwolves leapt into the fray, their snarls mingling with the clash of steel. He turned, and beside him stood the hooded figure, now more solid, more real. "This is the long night," the figure said, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "When the White Walkers first came, your ancestors stood against them. They forged alliances, built walls, and lit the flames of resistance. Their courage held back the darkness. The vision shifted, the battlefield dissolving into the great hall of Winterfell, filled with laughter and firelight. Lords and ladies feasted, children played at the feet of warriors, and the bonds of family wove together the foundation of the North. This," the figure continued, "is Winterfell in its prime. A place of strength, of warmth, of unyielding loyalty. The scenes came faster now. A direwolf pup nestled in the arms of a young girl. A raven soaring into the night. A blade buried in the frozen earth. Each image pulsed with meaning, a story whispered through time. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the glow faded, and Bran found himself once more in the silent crypts. The lantern dimmed, its light retreating like a fading dream. The hooded figure regarded him solemnly. "Guard what you have seen," it said, stepping back into the darkness. "Honor the legacy of the wolves." "Wait," Bran called. "Will I see you again?" The voice echoed faintly. "Perhaps, if the need is great." And then he was alone, shaken yet filled with a newfound sense of purpose. Bran made his way back through the corridors of Winterfell. When he returned to his chambers, Hodor still snored softly against the door. Bran slipped beneath his furs, his mind racing with the weight of history now resting upon his shoulders. That night, he did not dream of the lantern. He dreamed of a pack of direwolves running beneath the northern lights, their howls a song of unity, of strength, of an unbroken legacy. The morning light filtered through the high windows of Winterfell, casting a pale glow upon the stone walls. The castle had awakened, its halls bustling with life as servants hurried about their duties. Knights gathered for training, and the scent of fresh bread drifted from the kitchens. But Bran Stark moved through it, all as if in a trance, his mind lingering on the visions of the previous night. The weight of what he had seen, the echoes of his ancestors, the lantern's glow illuminating the past, clung to him like a shadow. He found himself drawn to the godswood, where the heart tree stood in silent vigil, its red leaves whispering in the wind. The face carved into its trunk seemed to watch him with knowing eyes, as if it too had seen the lantern's light. Summer padded beside him, his golden gaze watchful, his steps silent as fresh snow crunched beneath Bran's boots. Bran pressed a hand against the smooth bark of the heart tree, as he had seen his father do many times before. He closed his eyes and let the cold air fill his lungs. Was it real, he murmured to himself, or was it just a dream? If you have to ask, a voice answered, then perhaps you already know. Bran's eyes flew open. Across the clearing, wrapped in a heavy cloak, stood Maester Luwin. The old man's expression was kind, but his gaze was sharp, as if he saw more than he let on. Bran hesitated. He had not told anyone about the lantern, about the visions, about the hooded figure who spoke of memory and legacy. But something in Lewin's eyes made him wonder, did the Meister already know? I dreamed of Winterfell's past, Bran admitted, of battles fought and oaths sworn, of a lantern that held memories like fire. Meister Lewin stepped closer, his chain of office glinting in the soft morning light. Dreams are strange things, Bran, he said. The past whispers to those who listen, but it is the present that shapes the future. Bran frowned. But if I saw something true, if the lantern is real, then it means there are things in Winterfell's past that we've forgotten. Things we should remember. Lewin sighed, adjusting his cloak against the cold. Winterfell is old, older than most can comprehend. There are secrets beneath its stones that even I do not know. But the past is not always kind, Bran. Some memories are buried for a reason. Bran considered this, but deep in his heart, he knew he could not ignore what he had seen. He had felt the weight of his ancestors pressing upon him, seen the flickering light of the lantern reveal truths long hidden. He would not turn away from it. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the castle walls, Bran found himself wandering the corridors once more. The lantern's glow had stirred something within him, a hunger to understand Winterfell, to uncover its hidden stories. And so, when the halls grew quiet and the last echoes of the day faded, he returned to the crypts. This time, he was not alone. As he made his way down the stone steps, he heard the soft scuff of boots against the floor. He turned sharply, his breath catching, but it was only Lyra Snow. Lyra was the daughter of a carpenter, born of no noble house. Yet Winterfell was as much her home as it was his. With her red hair and green eyes, she was a striking figure, though the castle's servants often whispered of her bastard blood. But Bran had never cared for such things. "What are you doing down here?" Bran asked. Lyra smirked. "I could ask you the same." Bran hesitated. He did not know why, but he trusted Lyra. "There's something in the crypts," he admitted. "Something ancient. I saw it in a dream." Lyra's expression grew serious. "Then we should find it." Together, they ventured deeper into the crypts. The air was cold, thick with the scent of earth and stone. Their torches cast flickering shadows upon the carved faces of long-dead Starks, their statues standing solemn in the dark. Bran led them to where he had seen the lantern. The space beyond his ancestor's statue was empty now, but the memory of the golden glow still lingered in his mind. He pressed his fingers against the stone wall, as if expecting the past to awaken once more. "Are you sure this is the place?" Lyra asked. Bran nodded. "It was here, I know it." Lyra studied the stone carefully, then, without warning, reached into the crevice between the wall and the statue. Bran gasped as a faint click echoed through the crypt. The wall shifted. A section of the stone, previously indistinguishable from the rest, slid back to to reveal a passage, a dark, narrow tunnel that had been hidden for generations. Lyra turned to Bran, her eyes alight with curiosity. "Shall we?" Bran's heart pounded, but he nodded. He had come too far to turn back now. With Lyra leading the way, they stepped into the passage, the heavy air pressing against them. The tunnel sloped downward, deeper than the crypts should have gone. The further they walked, the older the walls felt, the stones rough and unshaped, as if carved in an age before Winterfell had taken its final form. Then, at last, they reached a chamber. The room was vast, lined with carvings of direwolves and ravens, of swords and stars. At its center, upon a stone pedestal, sat a chest bound in iron. It looked ancient, untouched by time, its surface etched with sigils Bran did not recognize. Lyra let out a low whistle. Now this is something. Bran stepped forward, his hands trembling. The lantern had not lied. Winterfell held secrets, and they had just uncovered one of them. But before he could reach the chest, a cold wind stirred the air. A voice, deep and distant, rumbled through the chamber. "You should not have come." Bran and Lyra froze. From the shadows, something moved. A figure, wrapped in darkness, with eyes that gleamed like distant stars. The air around it shimmered, bending and warping, as if the very fabric of reality struggled to contain it. Lyra reached for her dagger. Bran felt summer tense beside him. The figure stepped forward. The darkness was absolute, swallowing the chamber in an eerie silence. Bran's breath hitched as the air grew impossibly cold, the very stones beneath his feet seeming to pulse with a slow, ancient heartbeat. Summer let out a low growl beside him, his body tense, fur bristling against the unseen threat. Lyra's grip on her dagger tightened, the blade trembling in her hand. Then, like embers flickering to life, 2 points of light ignited in the void. Not fire, not lantern glow, but eyes deep, knowing, and filled with something beyond mortal understanding. The figure that had emerged from the shadows was not entirely human. Its robes shimmered, moving like mist, as though it were half-formed from the very darkness of the crypts. "You have entered a place that was meant to be forgotten," the voice intoned, low and resonant, as if echoing from the very stones. "Why do you seek the past?" Bran swallowed, his throat dry. He wanted to run, but his legs felt rooted to the floor. "I saw the lantern," he whispered. "I saw the memories of Winterfell, and I had to know more." The figure studied him, those burning eyes unblinking. "The past does not belong to the idle and the curious. It is a burden, one carried by those who understand its cost." Lyra stepped forward, her courage surprising even Bran. "We're not here to steal secrets," she said, "but Winterfell belongs to the Starks. If there's something down here that concerns them, they deserve to know." A silence stretched between them, heavy and expectant. Then, slowly, the figure moved. Its presence no longer loomed so terribly, though the weight of its unseen power still lingered in the air. "You speak boldly for one knot of their blood," the entity said, voice softer now, but no less commanding. "But you are wrong. Winterfell does not belong to the Starks." Bran frowned. "What do you mean?" The figure turned toward the ancient chest resting upon the pedestal. Its form flickered, shifting between shadow and something more solid. When it spoke again, the voice was quieter, almost wistful. "The first keep of Winterfell was built atop something older than stone," it said. "Older than House Stark. Older than men. Before the walls rose, before the banners flew, this place was something else, something wild. And that," it gestured toward the chest, "is what was left behind." Bran's heartbeat quickened. The thought that Winterfell itself had deeper roots than he had ever been told sent a thrill through him. He took a step forward, eyes locked onto the chest. The iron bands that bound it were rusted with age, the sigils etched into the surface, almost worn smooth by time. "If it's so dangerous, why not destroy it?" Lyra asked. The figure's eyes gleamed. "Because some things cannot be destroyed, only hidden." Bran hesitated, but something deep inside him, a call, a whisper that had echoed through his dreams, urged him onward. He reached for the chest. His fingers brushed the cold iron, and instantly the chamber seemed to shudder. The air thickened. A low hum vibrated through the stone, and the moment Bran unlatched the chest, the torches lining the chamber's walls flared, their flames twisting high as if grasping for air. Lyra took a step back, her breath sharp in the sudden shift of energy. Bran slowly lifted the lid. Inside, nestled within dark cloth, was an object unlike anything he had ever seen. It was a shard of ice, but it did not melt. The light from the torches refracted within it, swirling like trapped stars. It was beautiful, and yet something about it felt wrong. Ancient power radiated from it, a cold that was not of winter, but of something far deeper, far older. The figure's voice returned, softer this time. "This is a remnant of the long night, a fragment of what was banished beyond the wall, a piece of the darkness that once walked these lands." Bran could not look away from it. "The White Walkers," he whispered. The figure nodded. Before the wall was raised, before the Night's Watch was formed, the first men and the children of the forest fought together against an enemy who sought to consume the world in ice and death. When the darkness was driven back, some remnants of its power remained. "This is one of them," Lyra exhaled, shaking her head. "Then why keep it? Why not throw it into the deepest part of the sea, or shatter it?" The figure turned to her. "Because knowledge is power, child. And power is a blade that cuts both ways." A shiver ran down Bran's spine. He suddenly understood. This shard, this relic, whoever had hidden it had not done so to use it, but to ensure it never fell into the wrong hands. The knowledge of it alone was a danger. "What do we do with it?" Bran asked. The figure stepped back into the shadows, its form beginning to dissolve. That choice is yours, young Stark. But know this, there are others who seek what you have found, and not all will wield it wisely. With those final words, the figure vanished. The chamber fell silent once more. Bran and Lyra stood motionless, the weight of what they had uncovered settling heavily between them. The torches still burned, but their light felt colder. Lyra was the first to speak. "We have to tell Lord Stark." Bran hesitated. He should. His father would know what to do. But something deep inside him whispered that this was not a secret easily shared. "Not yet," he said. Lyra turned to him, frowning. "Bran, this isn't something we can hide." "I know," Bran admitted. "But if there are people looking for it, we have to understand what it is first. If we tell the wrong person, if word spreads," he shook his head. "We have to be careful." Lyra hesitated but nodded. "Then what do we do?" Bran looked at the chest, the shard of frozen light still resting within its folds. The air around it seemed to whisper, as if the ice itself remembered the battles it had seen. "We learn," Bran said. "We learn everything we can." With careful hands, he closed the lid, sealing the secret once more. But deep in his heart, he knew this was only the beginning. The weight of the discovery hung over Bran and Lyra like the heavy snows of midwinter. They left the hidden chamber in silence, sealing the passage behind them, though they both knew that nothing would ever truly be the same. The air in the crypts felt colder now, as if the presence of that ancient power had left an imprint upon the stone. Bran carried the knowledge like an unspoken burden, and he could see the same unease in Lyra's eyes. When they emerged from the crypts into the chill night air, the stars glimmered above Winterfell, sharp and clear against the velvet black. Snow fell in soft flurries, carried on the biting wind, but neither of them felt the cold. Lyra exhaled, her breath misting in the air. "This feels bigger than us," she murmured. Bran nodded. He wanted to tell his father, but something inside him hesitated. This wasn't just another mystery of Winterfell. This was something older, something dangerous. If the hooded figure had spoken the truth, there were others who sought what they had found, and the wrong hands could turn it into a weapon. "Give me a few days," Bran said finally. "Let me think about it." Lyra's eyes searched his face, but she nodded. "All right," she said, though uncertainty lingered in her voice. "But if anything feels wrong, we tell someone." Bran agreed, though he wasn't sure if he meant it. They parted ways in the courtyard, Lyra disappearing into the servants' quarters, while Bran made his way back to the castle. Summer padded at his side, silent but watchful, his golden eyes flickering toward the shadows as if sensing something unseen. Bran barely slept that night. His dreams were filled with visions, not of the lantern, but of ice creeping through the halls of Winterfell, of shadows stretching beneath the walls, of whispers curling through the night like mist. When he woke, the first light of dawn had barely crept over the horizon. He felt restless, as though something was shifting beneath his feet, unseen but inevitable. At breakfast, the great hall was alive with its usual chatter. Rob was speaking with Maester Lewin about patrol routes beyond the wall. Sansa was complaining about the cold, and Arya was nowhere to be seen, likely off causing mischief. His father sat at the head of the table, quiet and contemplative as always. Everything looked normal, but Bran knew better. His thoughts drifted back to the chest in the chamber below Winterfell, to the frozen shard pulsing with unnatural light. The past was bleeding into the present, and Bran could feel it in his very bones. Bran, he blinked and looked up. Rob was watching him. "You're quieter than usual," Rob noted. "What's on your mind?" Bran hesitated. For a moment, the words were on his lips to tell Rob everything, to reveal the hidden chamber and the truth of what lay beneath Winterfell. But instead, he forced a small smile. "Just a bad dream," he said. Rob gave him a knowing look, but didn't press further. "You should get some fresh air," he suggested. "Jon and Theon are training in the yard. Might do some good to move around." Bran nodded, though he wasn't sure training would ease the weight in his chest. After breakfast, he wandered the castle aimlessly, his feet taking him toward the Godswood. He needed to think, needed to make sense of the storm of thoughts in his head. The ancient weirwood tree stood tall and unshaken, its carved face serene, as if watching over all who sought its counsel. He wasn't alone. Lyra stood beneath the branches, arms crossed, her face turned toward the sky. She must have been waiting for him. When she spotted him, she pushed off the tree and approached. "I did some asking around," she said quietly. Bran stiffened. "About what?" Lyra gave him a look. "About the histories of Winterfell. There are stories, Bran, old ones. Stories about things buried deep, about secrets the Starks kept even from their own kin." She hesitated before adding, "Maester Lewin says the first keep was built over something ancient. No one knows what." Bran frowned. He had always thought of Winterfell as strong, unshakable. But what if its very foundation was built upon something the world was never meant to remember? What if someone else knows about the chamber? Lyra asked. The thought had crossed Bran's mind more than once. He hadn't forgotten the hooded figure's warning. There are others who seek what you have found. The mere idea made his stomach twist. "We have to make sure no one finds it," Bran said firmly. Lyra nodded, agreed. They left the Godswood in silence, both of them lost in thought. But as they made their way back through the courtyard, a voice called out to them, "You two look like you're up to something." Bran turned to find Theon Greyjoy standing near the practice yard, his sword slung casually over one shoulder. His smirk was familiar, half amusement, half challenge. Sneaking off to some secret corner of the castle, Bran forced a laugh. "Just taking a walk." Theon raised an eyebrow, but didn't push. "Well, if you're looking for adventure, you might as well come spar with us. Rob been itching for a fight." Bran shook his head. Not today. Theon shrugged and turned back toward the training grounds. Suit yourself. Lyra glanced at Bran as they continued walking. He's observant. Bran sighed. That's what worries me. They reached the entrance to the Great Hall. But before they could go inside, Bran caught a flicker of movement from the castle walls. A rider had arrived, cloaked in dark furs, moving with purpose. Even from a distance, Bran could tell the man was no ordinary traveler. The guards met him at the gate, and after a few brief words, one of them hurried inside, likely to fetch Lord Stark. Bran felt a cold prickle at the back of his neck. He and Lyra exchanged a glance. Who do you think he is? Lyra asked. Bran didn't know, but somehow, deep in his bones, he had the feeling that whoever had just arrived in Winterfell was tied to the secret they had uncovered, and that meant things were about to change. The rider's arrival sent ripples through Winterfell. Bran could see it in the way the guards stood a little straighter, the way passing servants exchanged glances, the way his father emerged from the great hall with measured steps, his face unreadable. Lord Eddard Stark was not a man easily shaken, but Bran could tell, whoever this stranger was, he had brought something more than mere news. From the castle steps, Bran and Lyra watched as the visitor dismounted. He was tall, wrapped in heavy furs, his face obscured by a hood lined with thick northern wolf pelts. His movements were careful, deliberate. He carried himself like a man who had spent years watching his back. The wind caught his cloak as he strode forward, revealing a sigil on his belt, a crescent moon, and a black tree. It was unfamiliar, but the way his father's expression hardened told Bran that this man was no mere traveler. The two men exchanged quiet words, too low for Bran to hear. Then, without another word, Eddard gestured for the stranger to follow him inside. The doors of the great hall closed behind them. Bran exhaled. That was strange. Lyra nodded, her brows furrowed. Did you see the way your father looked at him? Like he already knew what this was about. Bran chewed his lip. His father knew many things, but he rarely spoke of them unless it was necessary. And that was what worried him. Come on, Lyra whispered. We have to find out who he is. Bran hesitated. Sneaking after his father was one thing, but eavesdropping on a private meeting. If they were caught, it would not go unpunished. But something deep inside him, the same whisper that had led him to the crypts, told him that this was important. Nodding, he followed Lyra along the outer corridors, their steps light against the cold stone. The great hall had many hidden alcoves, and Lyra, who had spent her life weaving through the unseen corners of Winterfell, knew exactly where to lead him. They reached a narrow ledge above the main hall, hidden by the high beams and the banners that draped from the ceiling. Through a break in the stonework, they could see and hear everything below. Lord Stark and the strangers stood by the great fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering light. A pitcher of warmed wine sat between them, untouched. "You came sooner than I expected," Eddard said, his voice heavy with something Bran could not place. The stranger pulled back his hood, revealing a face lined with years of hardship. His hair was the color of iron, his eyes dark and sharp. "You sent word," the man said, "but I had already been traveling south." Eddard's jaw tightened. "Then you already know." The stranger nodded. "The winds are shifting, Stark. There are murmurs from the wall. Wildlings fleeing south, not from men, but from something else. And the old places, they are waking." Bran felt his pulse quicken. Lyra's fingers curled around the edge of the stone, gripping tightly. "What do you mean, waking?" Eddard asked. The man exhaled. "I've seen things I cannot explain. Whispers in the frost, footsteps where no man walks. The old stones hum with something that has been asleep for too long." He leaned in. "And there are others who listen. Others who are looking." Eddard's expression darkened. "Looking for what?" The stranger hesitated, then reached into his cloak. He withdrew something small, wrapped in thick cloth, and placed it on the table between them. Bran strained to see. Eddard unwrapped the object carefully, and as the cloth fell away, Bran saw it, a shard of ice, clear as glass, pulsing with a cold light from within. Bran nearly gasped. It was the same as the one in the hidden chamber. Eddard stared at it for a long moment before speaking. "Where did you find this?" The stranger's voice was low. Beyond the wall, deep in the frost fangs. He met Eddard's gaze. It was not alone. The silence that followed was heavy. Eddard ran a hand over his beard, his eyes dark with thought. "Then it's worse than I feared." The stranger nodded. "A storm is coming, Stark. One older than kings, older than thrones. The shadows are growing again." Eddard clenched his fists, as if weighing the weight of the world in his hands. "And the Knights watch." "They watch," the man said grimly. "But they do not understand what they're watching for. Not yet." Bran turned to Lyra, his breath shallow. "This is bigger than we thought." Lyra nodded, her face pale. "It means we're not the only ones who found it." Bran swallowed. "And if others are looking, that means someone will come for it." Below, Eddard exhaled slowly. "What would you have me do?" The stranger's eyes darkened. "Prepare." Silence settled over the hall, like freshly fallen snow. Finally, Eddard rose, wrapping the shard back in cloth. "This stays between us for now." The man nodded, agreed. Bran and Lyra exchanged glances. They had seen enough. Carefully, they slipped away from their hiding place, their minds reeling with what they had learned. When they reached the courtyard, the chill in the air felt sharper, heavier. "What do we do now?" Lyra whispered. Bran clenched his fists. "We keep watch." The wind howled through Winterfell's towers that night, carrying with it the weight of something unseen. Bran lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind restless. The conversation in the great hall echoed in his thoughts. The shard of ice, the warning of something stirring beyond the wall, the knowledge that that there were others searching for what he and Lyra had found. Sleep did not come easily. When it did, it was filled with visions, fleeting and fragmented. Snow-covered ruins buried beneath the ice, flickering blue flames in the darkness. A whispering voice that curled through the wind like a serpent. He saw figures in the distance, their eyes glowing like distant stars, watching, waiting. Then a sound, distant but growing closer. A pounding, a heartbeat. No, something heavier. Footsteps. Bran jolted awake, his breath sharp in the cold air. He sat up, his heart hammering. Then he heard it again, this time, not in his dreams. A knock at the door. Summer lifted his head from where he lay near the hearth. Ears pricked forward, his golden eyes gleaming in the dim light. The direwolf let out a soft growl. Bran hesitated, then slid out of bed and padded toward the door. When he pulled it open, he was not surprised to find Lyra standing there, her face pale in the torchlight. "We have a problem," she whispered. Bran stepped aside, letting her in. "What is it?" She glanced at Summer warily, then back at Bran. "Someone else knows." Bran felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Knows what?" Lyra shut the door behind her, her voice barely above a breath. "About the chamber, about the shard." She hesitated, then added, "And I think they're looking for it." Bran swallowed. He had known this was coming. Ever since the hooded figure had warned him, ever since the stranger had arrived at Winterfell with another shard of ice, he had felt the weight of something looming over him. But now it was real. "Who?" he asked. Lyra shook her head. "I don't know, but I overheard the guards talking. There was a rider, another one. He arrived late, after the gates had closed. They didn't let him in, but he left a message." Bran's stomach twisted. What did it say? Lyra hesitated, then spoke the words slowly. "The past is waking. The wolves are not the only ones who remember." The room felt suddenly colder. Even Summer, usually calm, let out a soft whine and shifted uneasily. Bran took a breath. "We have to check the crypts." Lyra's eyes widened. "Now, in the middle of the night?" Bran nodded. "If someone is looking for it, we need to make sure it's still there." She hesitated only a moment before nodding. "Then, let's go." They moved quietly through the corridors, careful not to wake anyone. The castle was silent, the torches flickering dimly against the stone walls. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows as if something unseen were pressing against them. The descent into the crypts felt heavier this time. Every shadow seemed to stretch farther. Every gust of cold air felt sharper. Summer padded at their side, his presence comforting but tense. When they reached the hidden passage, Bran pressed his fingers against the stone, searching for the hidden latch Lyra had found before. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a soft asterisk click asterisk. The wall shifted. Bran and Lyra exchanged glances. The passage was still hidden, still untouched, but that did not mean they were safe. They slipped inside, moving quickly through the narrow tunnel. When they reached the hidden chamber, Bran's breath caught. The chest was still there. Relief flooded through him, but only for a moment. Something was different. The air was wrong. It felt heavier, thick with something Bran couldn't explain. The torches along the walls, which had once flickered with a warm, steady glow, now burned lower, their flames flickering as though struggling against some unseen force. The carvings along the chamber walls, the direwolves, the ravens, the runes seemed darker. The shadows around them stretched unnaturally long. Lyra took a step forward. "It feels different," she whispered. Bran nodded, his fingers curling into fists. Something changed. He stepped toward the chest, his heart hammering. Slowly, carefully, he reached for the latch and lifted the lid. The shard was still there. Its frozen light pulsed softly, shifting like trapped stars within the ice. But something else had been left beside it. A symbol carved into the stone of the chest. A spiral. Lyra's breath hitched. That wasn't there before. Bran traced the shape with his fingers. The carving was fresh, the edges sharp, as if someone had only just cut into the stone. Someone was here, Bran whispered. A soft wind stirred through the chamber, though there was no place for it to come from. It brushed against Bran's cheek like an exhale. The flames along the walls flickered violently, dimming to near darkness. Then, a whisper, not a voice, not words, just the faintest breath of sound, curling through the chamber like mist. Bran froze. Lyra went still. Even Summer, ever watchful, bared his fangs and let out a low, warning growl. Bran didn't move. His pulse thundered in his ears. Then slowly, deliberately, he closed the chest. "We need to leave," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra nodded, stepping back toward the tunnel. Bran followed, his eyes never leaving the darkness at the edge of the chamber. Summer was the last to move, his hackles still raised. As Bran turned to leave, he could not shake the feeling that something was still watching. As they emerged from the crypts and into the cold night air, Bran exhaled, releasing the breath he hadn't realized he had been holding. The wind bit at his skin, but the chill he felt went deeper than that. Lyra turned to him, her face pale. "Bran, that symbol. I've seen it before." Bran swallowed. "Where?" She hesitated. "In the old stories. The ones the Meister says are just myths." Bran met her gaze. He already knew the answer. "The White Walkers," he said. The night around them felt suddenly vast. The sky stretched wide, with stars that seemed colder than before. Lyra nodded. "If they're looking for the shard." Bran didn't let her finish. He already knew what she was going to say. They weren't just looking. They had already found it. The cold had changed. It was no longer the ordinary bite of winter, no longer the crisp air that Bran had known all his life. This was something deeper, something ancient, curling through Winterfell's walls like an unseen specter. Bran and Lyra walked swiftly through the courtyard, their breaths misting in the moonlight, their hearts pounding with the weight of what they had discovered. Summer padded beside them, his golden eyes darting toward every shadow. The direwolf could sense it too, the shift in the air, the presence of something unnatural. They needed answers. Bran barely noticed his feet carrying him toward the Meister's tower until he was already at the door, pushing it open without hesitation. Lyra followed, glancing over her shoulder as though expecting something or someone to emerge from the darkness behind them. Inside, the chamber was warm, the scent of parchment and burning oil filling the air. Meister Luwin sat at his desk, quill in hand, scribbling over a weathered scroll. The flickering candlelight cast deep shadows across the walls. He looked up at their sudden arrival, his expression shifting from surprise to quiet concern. Bran, his voice was calm but watchful. "What is it?" Bran hesitated. He and Lyra exchanged glances, both uncertain of how much they should say. But there was no turning back now. "There's something in the crypts," Bran said. "Something old." Meister Luwin set his quill aside. "Winterfell's crypts are filled with old things," he said evenly. "But I suspect you mean something different." Bran took a breath. A hidden chamber with something inside. Luwin's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker in his eyes, something close to recognition. He folded his hands atop the desk, waiting. Bran pressed on. There was a chest, and inside, a shard of ice. He hesitated, then added, "Like the one the traveler brought my father." That made Luwin go still. Bran could see the gears turning behind the Meister's eyes, the careful calculation of a man who knew more than he let on. Slowly, Luwin exhaled. "You were not meant to find that." Bran's stomach twisted. "So you asterisk do know about it." Luwin leaned forward, his voice dropping lower. "There are things buried beneath Winterfell that should not be disturbed. That shard, if it is what I suspect, it is a remnant of a war fought before the wall was built." He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I had hoped it would remain forgotten." Lyra crossed her arms. "Well, someone else didn't forget. Someone carved a symbol into the chest." At that, Luwin's fingers tensed. "What symbol?" Bran hesitated, then traced the shape into the wood of the desk. A spiral. The reaction was immediate. Luwin's breath caught, his normally steady hands gripping the desk's edge. The flickering candlelight seemed to dim. Or perhaps it was just the weight of the knowledge settling over them. "That is no ordinary mark," Luwin said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It is a sign of the others." Bran's heart pounded. "The White Walkers." Luwin nodded gravely. "There are few who still remember their true history. The Long Night is spoken of in half-truths and legends, but what you found is real. The White Walkers were not just driven beyond the wall, they left traces of themselves behind. Some say they sought to return. Others claim they never truly left." He leaned back, looking tired, older than he had seemed a moment ago. "That shard It is dangerous, Bran. It is a piece of the dark magic that created them. Silence settled between them, heavy and suffocating. Lyra was the first to speak. Then why keep it here? Why not destroy it? Luwin's gaze darkened. Because there are some things that cannot be destroyed. Bran shivered, remembering the way the ice had pulsed in the torchlight, as though it was alive. Lyra, ever braver than most, pressed on. We think someone else is looking for it. Luwin frowned. Who? We don't know, Bran admitted. But there was a rider at the gates. He left a message. The past is waking. The wolves are not the only ones who remember. Luwin paled. And your father, does he know? Bran shook his head. Not yet. The Meister exhaled, standing slowly. He moved to one of the high shelves, pulling down an old, leather-bound tome. The book's spine was cracked, the pages yellowed with age. He set it before them and flipped it open, revealing sketches of symbols, maps of the north, and drawings of things that should not exist. The spiral was among them. This symbol, Luwin said, tracing the shape with one weathered finger, has been found carved into trees beyond the wall, arranged in stones upon the snow, burned into the earth where no fire should burn. He met Bran's gaze. It is a mark of the others, a sign that they were there. Bran swallowed. Or a sign that they are asterisk here. Luwin said nothing. He didn't need to. The implication was already there. Lyra clenched her fists. Then we have to move the shard. If someone is coming for it, we can't let them find it. Luwin hesitated, then nodded. You're right, but it must be done carefully. Your father must be told. Bran hesitated. His father. Lord Eddard Stark was a man of honor, of duty. He would know what to do. But Bran also remembered the weight in his father's eyes when he had spoken to the traveler. The wariness, the quiet fear. If his father knew about the shard, why had he never spoken of it? Lyra must have seen the hesitation in his face, because she whispered, Bran, what if your father already knows? Bran didn't want to believe it. But a part of him, the part that had seen the flicker in his father's eyes, the way he had hidden the traveler's shard away with no further discussion, could not ignore the possibility. What if the shard beneath Winterfell was not a secret to Lord Stark? What if he had been guarding it all along? The thought sent a shiver through Bran's bones, colder than the winter wind outside. Luwin stood, closing the book with a soft asterisk thud. We must act quickly, he said. Come, there is something I must show you. Bran and Lyra exchanged glances, then followed as Luwin led them deeper into the tower. The candlelight flickered against the walls. The wind howled outside, and far below, in the depths of Winterfell's crypts, the ice pulsed softly, waiting. Meister Luwin moved swiftly despite his age, leading Bran and Lyra through the winding corridors of Winterfell's inner keep. The flickering candlelight barely kept pace with them, casting shifting shadows against the cold stone walls. Bran's heart pounded, his mind racing with possibilities. His father had known about the shard. He had kept its existence a secret, buried deep beneath Winterfell. And now someone or something was searching for it. Luwin paused before a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. He produced a key from within his robes and turned the lock with a sharp asterisk click asterisk. The door groaned open, revealing a chamber Bran had never seen before. Inside, the room was lined with shelves filled with ancient scrolls and weathered tomes. Maps of the North, some so old the ink had nearly faded, were spread across a large wooden table. But what caught Bran's attention was the chest in the center of the room, smaller than the one hidden in the crypts, but bound in the same iron and marked with the same sigils. Luwin gestured toward it. "This was brought to Winterfell long before your father's time," he said. "It is one of the few records left of the first battles against the White Walkers." Bran and Lyra stepped forward, exchanging nervous glances. The air in the room felt thick, charged with the weight of forgotten history. Luwin unlatched the chest and lifted the lid. Inside was a bundle wrapped in dark, time-worn cloth. Slowly, carefully, the Maester unfolded it, revealing something that glowed faintly in the dim light. A blade. It was unlike any sword Bran had ever seen. The steel shimmered with a faint, eerie light, its surface rippling like frozen water. The hilt was wrapped in leather, but even from a distance, Bran could feel the cold radiating from it. "This is not ordinary steel," Luwin murmured. "This is a relic from the days before the wall was raised. A weapon forged in dragonfire, meant to fight the darkness." He looked at Bran. "It is Valyrian steel, but older than any living smith can recall." Bran stared at the blade in awe. "Why is it here? Why not with the Night's Watch?" Luwin's expression was unreadable. "Because your ancestors believed it should remain where it was needed most. Here, in Winterfell." He let the words hang in the air before adding, "And because there was always the fear that one day the wall might not be enough." Lyra let out a slow breath. "You're saying the Starks have been preparing for this for generations?" Luwin nodded, but not openly. Even most of Winterfell's lords were never told the full truth. Knowledge is a powerful thing, but in the wrong hands, it is more dangerous than any weapon. He glanced toward Bran. "That is why you must be careful with what you have learned." Bran swallowed hard. He had always thought of Winterfell as home, as the stronghold of the North, as a place where he was safe. But now he saw it for what it truly was, an outpost, standing at the edge of something vast and unknowable. A fortress built not just to rule, but to protect. A shield against the dark. Before he could respond, a knock echoed through the heavy wooden door. Not a loud, impatient knock, but a deliberate one. 3 slow raps against the wood. Luwin tensed. Bran and Lyra exchanged glances. The Maester moved to the door and hesitated before opening it a fraction. A man stood on the other side, half shrouded in the dim torchlight. He was clad in heavy furs, his hood drawn low over his face. But Bran recognized him immediately. The traveler, the man who had come to Winterfell with the shard of ice. Luwin exhaled sharply. "You should not be here." The traveler stepped inside without invitation. His boots left a faint trail of melted snow upon the stone floor. His eyes, dark and watchful, flicked to Bran and Lyra before returning to Luwin. "There is no time for secrets," he said. His voice was low, edged with urgency. "They are coming." Bran's chest tightened. "Who?" The traveler glanced toward the chest, toward the Valyrian steel blade resting within. His face was grim. "The ones who left their mark in the crypts, the ones searching for what has been hidden." He turned to Bran. "The ones who do not fear walls." A cold prickle ran down Bran's spine. Lyra frowned. "How do you know this?" The traveler hesitated, then pulled something from his cloak. A piece of wood, jagged and charred, its edges blackened as if it had been burned. He tossed it onto the table. Bran stepped closer. It was part of a shield. The remains of a sigil could still be seen, half lost to the flames. A direwolf, the sigil of House Stark. Bran looked up, his stomach twisting. "Where did you find this?" The traveler's expression was grave. "Among the ruins of a watchtower north of the wall. It was still burning when I arrived." Luwin let out a slow breath. "The old places," he murmured. "The ones built before the castles, before the wall itself." Bran swallowed. "You're saying they're already south of the wall?" The traveler met his gaze. "I'm saying they never left." Silence heavy, unshakable. Then, a distant sound, faint at first, carried upon the wind. A deep, resonant asterisk boom asterisk. Not thunder, not the howling of wolves. A horn. One blast. Two. Bran's blood ran cold. He knew what that sound meant. The watchman at the wall had a signal one blast for rangers returning. 2 for wildlings. 3 for something else. 3 for the others. The traveler's voice was quiet, but firm. "You must prepare." Luwin closed the chest with a heavy asterisk thud. "Winterfell has stood for thousands of years," he said. "It will not fall now." But even as he spoke the words, Bran could not shake the feeling that something had already begun, that the past was not just waking, it was already here. The third horn blast had not come, but the first 2 still echoed in Bran's mind long after the traveler had left. He and Lyra sat in the dimly lit chamber, the flickering candlelight stretching their shadows against the stone walls. The weight of the traveler's words pressed upon them. Asterisk, they never left. Winterfell had always been a place of safety, a fortress against the bitter cold of the north. But now Bran saw it differently. It was not just a castle. It was a shield, a final barrier between the waking world and the nightmares beyond the wall. Lyra broke the silence. If they're already south of the wall, we're running out of time. Bran nodded. We have to tell my father. Luwin hesitated. Your father has known more than he's let on. But if the time has come, then yes, he must know everything. Bran stood. He didn't care about keeping secrets anymore. If something was coming for the shard beneath Winterfell, his father needed to be prepared. He turned toward the door, but before he could reach it, the torches in the chamber flickered. The air changed. Summer let out a low growl. His golden eyes locked on the doorway. The great direwolf lowered his head, his hackles rising. A sound distant yet unmistakable. A whisper. It did not belong to the wind. Bran froze. He wasn't sure if he had truly heard it, or if it had merely slipped into his mind like a breath of cold air. But Lyra heard it too. Her hand instinctively went to the dagger at her belt. Then another sound. This one unmistakable. A distant asterisk boom. Not from the wall this time. From inside Winterfell. Bran's breath caught. The crypts. Lyra paled. Someone's down there. Luwin rose swiftly. If they mean to take the shard, we cannot allow it. Bran turned to Summer. Come. The direwolf did not hesitate. He was already moving before Bran reached the door, his massive form slipping into the shadows like a silent wraith. Bran and Lyra followed, their feet swift against the stone. They moved through the quiet corridors of Winterfell, the castle dark in the hours before dawn. Then another sound, faint but deliberate. The unmistakable echo of movement beneath the earth. They reached the entrance to the crypts, where two guards stood with torches, their expressions uncertain. The noise came from below, one said. Lord Stark ordered us to. Then a sound cut through the air. A asterisk snap asterisk, sharp and sudden, followed by the thud of something heavy hitting the ground. One of the torches flickered. Bran didn't wait. He slipped past the guards and into the crypts, Lyra close behind. The descent felt different this time. The air was thicker, pressing against them like unseen hands. The torches lining the walls swayed, as though a breath of wind had moved through the stone corridors, though there was no wind this deep below. Then Bran saw it. The entrance to the hidden passage was open. A flickering light glowed from within, shadows shifting along the walls. Bran hesitated only for a moment before stepping inside. The chamber was no longer silent. A figure stood at the pedestal, the chest already open. A cloaked man, his face obscured by a heavy hood. But it was not just one man. There were asterisks too. Bran's breath hitched. They had found it. The cloaked figures turned at the sound of footsteps. The nearest one moved swiftly, reaching for something at his belt. A blade. Lyra reacted faster. She lunged forward, drawing her dagger and slashing toward the attacker's arm. The steel met flesh, and the man let out a sharp hiss of pain. The second figure moved, reaching for the shard, a blur of white and gray. Summer struck like a storm, leaping forward with a snarl. His teeth sank into the second man's arm before he could touch the ice. A cry of pain, followed by the clash of steel. The first man recovered, swinging his sword toward Lyra. She barely dodged, the blade cutting through the air just inches from her shoulder. Bran's heart pounded. He had no weapon, no way to fight. But he didn't need to. Something moved within the chamber. The air twisted, as if the very walls of Winterfell had exhaled. The shard of ice pulsed. A wave of cold shot through the room. The flames in the torches dimmed, flickering wildly. The stone itself seemed to groan under the weight of something unseen. The attackers froze. For the first time, Bran saw the full shape of the spiraling symbol that had been carved into the chest. It wasn't just a mark. It was an asterisk warning. The man Lyra had wounded swayed on his feet, his breath visible in the freezing air. He turned to his companion. "This place is cursed." The second man, still struggling against Summer's grip, let out a choked cry. "We have what we need." The first man hesitated only a second longer before turning and fleeing into the passage. The second tried to follow, but Summer snarled, his grip tightening. The man barely managed to kick himself free, stumbling backward before sprinting after his companion. Lyra moved to chase them, but Bran caught her wrist. No. She shot him a furious look. "We can't just let them." They didn't take the shard. The realization hit them both at the same time. Bran turned back toward the pedestal. The chest was open, but the shard of ice still lay untouched within. They hadn't stolen it. They had activated it. The ice within the shard swirled, as if something deep inside had awakened. The cold that filled the chamber no longer felt natural. It was something else. Something asterisk, watching asterisk. Bran swallowed. "We have to close this chamber." Lyra hesitated, her gaze flickering toward the passage where the attackers had fled. But she nodded, agreed. Together, they sealed the chest once more. The air remained thick with unseen weight, but the pulsing from the shard slowed. The moment they stepped back into the crypts, they slammed the hidden passage shut, pressing against it, as if that alone would keep the darkness locked away. Bran exhaled. "They'll come back." Lyra nodded grimly. "And next time, they won't run." Bran looked down at Summer, the direwolf's fur still bristling. His gaze locked on the sealed entrance. They had won this battle, but war was coming. Dawn was creeping over Winterfell when Bran and Lyra emerged from the crypts, their breaths still quick, their hearts still racing. The cold had sunk into their bones, but it wasn't just winter's chill. It was something deeper, something ancient that had stirred in the depths below. The attackers had fled, but they had left something behind. Proof that Winterfell's greatest secret was no longer hidden. The shard had been awakened. Bran knew they had no more time to wait, no more time for secrets. He turned to Lyra, his voice firm despite the tremor in his She nodded. There was no argument left to make. They hurried through the courtyard, past the first stirrings of Winterfell, waking to another day. Stable hands were tending to the horses. Smoke curled from the kitchen chimneys, and guards patrolled the walls as if nothing had changed. But Bran knew better. Everything had changed. They reached the great hall just as Lord Stark was stepping outside, already clad in his heavy cloak, his sword resting at his hip. His expression was unreadable, but his gaze landed on Bran with quiet intensity, as if he had already been expecting him. Bran, his father's voice was steady. "What is it?" Bran hesitated for only a moment. Then, taking a breath, he spoke. "The crypts. Someone was there." Eddard Stark's expression darkened. "Who?" "We don't know," Lyra answered. "Two men. They found the hidden chamber. They tried to take the shard." For the first time, his father's composure faltered. A flicker of something crossed his face, something Bran had never seen before. Fear. He turned sharply to the nearest guard. "Double the watch on the gates. No one enters or leaves without my order." The guard nodded and hurried off. Bran swallowed. "Father, you knew, didn't you, about the shard?" Lord Stark's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with a sigh, he gestured for Bran and Lyra to follow him inside. The great hall was quiet at this early hour, the hearth fires still low from the night. Eddard moved to the head of the long table, resting his hands on the wood, his gaze heavy with things left unsaid. "I had hoped," he said at last, "that this day would never come." Bran's stomach twisted. "Then you knew what was down there." His father nodded, and more. Lyra leaned forward. "Then tell us." Eddard met her gaze, his eyes as cold and sharp as the winter wind. The shard beneath Winterfell was not meant to be used. It was meant to be asterisk kept asterisk. Bran frowned. Kept for what? His father's expression was grim. For when the wall fails, silence stretched between them. Bran felt his chest tighten. The wall can't fail. Eddard exhaled. That's what we've always told ourselves. His voice was quieter now, as if speaking the words aloud would make them real. But the wall is not just ice and stone. It was built with something older, something deeper. Magic. And magic fades. Bran's fingers curled into fists. And if it does, his father's gaze did not waver. Then Winterfell is the last line of defense. The words sank like stones in Bran's chest. His home, his safe, familiar home, was not just a fortress. It was a shield. A place where the last embers of a forgotten war had been buried, waiting for the day they might be needed again. Lyra shook her head. But if the shard is supposed to be kept safe, why are people looking for it now? Eddard's jaw tightened. Because they sense the same thing I do. The winds are changing. The long peace is breaking. And what was once asleep is waking. Bran thought of the whisper in the crypts. The unnatural cold. The spiral symbol carved into the chest. They left their mark, he murmured. They wanted us to know they were here. His father nodded. And they will return. A heavy silence settled over the hall. Bran looked at his father. What do we do? Eddard Stark straightened, the weight of generations resting upon his shoulders. We prepare. Bran swallowed, for war. His father met his gaze. For winter. The words sent a shiver down Bran's spine. Outside, the wind howled, and the first snows of the season began to fall.